Some people spend years studying numbers, symbols, and patterns, convinced they can predict every twist of your life before you even take the first step. They'll tell you your future is already written, your limits already measured, your destiny already decided. Funny, isn't it? The moment someone believes they understand you completely, they stop seeing the one thing that changes everything: choice. A chart may reveal tendencies, but it can never measure the fire that awakens when a person refuses to become a prisoner of expectations. The greatest mystery has never been the stars above your head. It's the decision you make when the whole world insists it already knows who you're supposed to be. The most dangerous lie ever whispered into someone's mind is that their life was decided before they had the chance to live it. Tell a person their future is already written, and many will stop writing their own story. They'll begin treating every failure as proof that destiny was against them, and every success as nothing more than a lucky exception. Strange how easily people surrender their freedom when someone wraps certainty in mysterious language. There will always be those who claim they have decoded your path. They'll study patterns, numbers, dates, habits, and probabilities, speaking with absolute confidence about where you're going and who you're destined to become. Confidence is convincing. That's why it's so effective. People mistake certainty for truth, even when certainty is built on assumptions rather than reality. But human beings have always been unpredictable. That's what makes them terrifying and extraordinary at the same time. A single decision can erase years of expectation. One moment of courage can rewrite a lifetime of fear. One refusal to obey the script can destroy every prediction made by those who believed they had you completely figured out. Think about how often people become prisoners of labels. They hear, "You'll never succeed," and suddenly every obstacle becomes confirmation. They hear, "This is who you are," and they spend decades protecting an identity they never chose. The label becomes the cage, and eventually they stop testing whether the door was ever locked in the first place. The truth is far less comfortable. Every day presents a choice, and choice has an irritating habit of ignoring expectations. It doesn't care what people assumed about you yesterday. It doesn't ask permission from your past before creating your future. It simply waits quietly for the moment you decide that your next step matters more than your previous mistakes. People love certainty because uncertainty demands responsibility. If your future is already decided, then failure isn't your fault. Success isn't your achievement. Everything becomes someone else's design. It's a comforting belief because it removes the burden of ownership. You no longer have to ask difficult questions about your habits, your discipline, or your excuses. The script becomes the villain, and you become its obedient actor. But life rarely rewards obedient actors. It rewards those willing to improvise when the stage collapses. Those willing to challenge every expectation placed upon them. Those who refuse to let predictions become permission to stop trying. Perhaps that's why the strongest people often surprise everyone around them. Not because they possessed secret knowledge, but because they understood something simple that others ignored. The future isn't a prison waiting for your arrival. It's an empty room waiting for your decisions. Every action redraws the map. Every choice shifts the direction, and every moment you refuse to surrender your will becomes another page no prediction could ever fully write. Knowledge has an impressive way of making people feel powerful. Collect enough facts, memorize enough systems, learn enough theories, and sooner or later someone begins believing they understand everything. That's where the real danger begins. Information creates confidence, but confidence without wisdom creates blindness. A person can know thousands of details and still completely misunderstand the human being standing right in front of them. People often confuse knowing with understanding. They believe that because they can explain a pattern, they have explained a person. Because they recognize a behavior, they assume they know the intention behind it. Reality isn't that obedient. Human beings don't fit neatly into formulas. They change, they adapt, they surprise themselves. That's what makes every attempt to reduce a life into a fixed equation quietly amusing. Look closely at those who speak with absolute certainty. They leave no room for questions, no space for doubt, no possibility that they might be mistaken. Every answer sounds polished, every conclusion feels final. Yet wisdom behaves differently. Wisdom listens longer than it speaks. It observes before judging. It understands that certainty often belongs to those who haven't looked deeply enough. It's fascinating how easily people become prisoners of their own knowledge. Once they accept an explanation, they stop searching for a better one. They stop noticing the details that don't fit their conclusions. The mind begins protecting what it already believes instead of discovering what is actually true. Suddenly, every new piece of evidence becomes something to ignore rather than something to explore. The world is filled with people carrying books they've never truly understood. They repeat powerful words without living powerful lives. They quote ideas about courage while avoiding difficult conversations. They speak about honesty while carefully protecting convenient lies. Knowledge decorates the mind, but wisdom transforms character. One can be borrowed. The other must be earned. That's why appearances can be so deceptive. Someone may sound intelligent, using complicated language and endless explanations, yet crumble the moment reality refuses to follow their expectations. Another person may speak very little, but understand people with astonishing accuracy, because they've spent more time observing than performing. Real wisdom notices what information often misses. It recognizes fear hidden behind arrogance. It sees loneliness disguised as pride. It understands that anger is sometimes disappointment wearing armor. It knows that the loudest person in the room is not always the strongest, and the quietest person is not always the weakest. Surface level knowledge counts visible pieces. Wisdom understands the invisible connections between them. The greatest mistake isn't lacking knowledge. It's believing knowledge alone makes you wise. The moment someone thinks they've figured out every mystery, they stop learning. They stop questioning. They stop growing. And while they're busy protecting their certainty, life quietly changes the rules, reminding everyone that information may fill the mind, but only wisdom keeps it from becoming its own prison. Reality is a curious thing. Most people believe it exists entirely outside of them, as if life simply happens while they stand there collecting the consequences. They blame circumstances, timing, luck, and the opinions of strangers, never noticing the invisible force shaping nearly every decision they make. The mind, quiet, relentless, and unbelievably powerful. Long before your hands build anything, your thoughts have already decided whether it's possible. Watch two people face the exact same obstacle. One sees a wall. The other sees a door waiting to be found. The obstacle hasn't changed. The world hasn't changed. Only the meaning assigned to it has changed. That's the strange part about perception. It doesn't merely describe reality. It influences the actions that eventually create it. People underestimate the conversations happening inside their own heads. Every doubt repeated often enough becomes a belief. Every belief defended long enough becomes an identity. Before long, they stop asking whether those thoughts are true. They simply assume they are. It's remarkable how willingly people obey voices that have never once proven themselves trustworthy. Someone whispers, "You're not capable," and years later that sentence still echoes in the background, making every opportunity feel dangerous. Another voice insists, "People like you never succeed," and suddenly failure begins looking like destiny instead of a temporary lesson. The prison isn't built with steel. It's built with repeated thoughts accepted without question. The amusing part is that many of these thoughts were never yours to begin with. They were handed to you by disappointed people, fearful people, controlling people, and people who surrendered to their own limitations long ago. Their fears became your rules. Their failures became your expectations. Their doubts quietly settled into your mind until you forgot they had someone else's fingerprints all over them. The mind doesn't simply observe the world. It filters it. It highlights evidence supporting what it already believes, while quietly ignoring everything that disagrees. Believe the world is against you, and every setback becomes proof. Believe growth is possible, and every setback becomes instruction. The same event creates two completely different futures, depending on the story your mind chooses to tell. That's why manipulation begins in thought before it ever appears in action. Convince someone they're powerless, and they'll stop trying. Convince them they're broken, and they'll stop healing. Convince them their limits are permanent, and they'll begin defending those limits as though they were protecting something valuable. The greatest illusion isn't that the world controls your future. It's believing your own mind has no role in creating it. Every decision begins with an idea. Every achievement begins with permission given to yourself before anyone else believes in you. The battlefield has never been the streets, the offices, or the opinions of strangers. It has always been the quiet place where your thoughts either become your strongest ally or the most convincing enemy you'll ever face. Fear has a remarkable talent for making ordinary ideas feel absolute. Whisper a frightening prediction into an uncertain mind, and suddenly possibility becomes certainty. A simple warning transforms into an invisible prison. The prediction itself may hold no real power, yet the fear surrounding it quietly begins directing every decision. That's the trick. Fear doesn't need to be true. It only needs to be believed. People often think they're reacting to reality, when in fact they're reacting to the picture fear has painted inside their minds. A shadow becomes a monster. A setback becomes permanent failure. A single mistake becomes proof that success was never meant for them. It's fascinating how imagination, when guided by fear instead of reason, can build prisons stronger than steel. The greatest weapon fear possesses isn't pain. It's anticipation. It convinces you that something terrible is always waiting just around the corner. Before anything has even happened, you've already lived through the disaster 100 times inside your head. Your body responds as though the danger is real. Your confidence begins shrinking, and your decisions become smaller, safer, and easier to control. That's why frightening predictions are so effective. They don't have to control your future directly. They only have to influence your choices today. Tell someone they'll fail, and they begin avoiding opportunities. Tell them they'll be betrayed, and they stop trusting people who deserve it. Tell them they're destined for disappointment, and they quietly sabotage every chance to prove the prediction wrong. The fear becomes the architect, while the person unknowingly builds the very future they hope to escape. It's almost theatrical. The prediction walks onto the stage dressed as certainty, but fear writes every line of the performance. Without fear, the prediction is just another opinion. With fear, it becomes an invisible authority that people obey without ever questioning who gave it permission to rule their lives. Notice how manipulators rarely rely on facts alone. Facts encourage thinking. Fear encourages obedience. A frightened mind asks fewer questions because survival feels more important than curiosity. It accepts limits without investigation. It confuses emotional intensity with truth. The louder the fear grows, the quieter critical thinking becomes. The irony is impossible to ignore. People spend years trying to escape futures that existed only because they believed they were unavoidable. Every cautious step, every abandoned dream, every opportunity left untouched becomes another brick in the wall fear promised was already there. They don't lose because the prediction was accurate. They lose because fear convinced them resistance was pointless. Fear never predicts tomorrow with certainty. It simply borrows today's imagination and disguises it as destiny. It speaks with confidence, feeds on hesitation, grows stronger with every unquestioned assumption, and waits patiently for someone to mistake possibility for inevitability, surrendering their choices long before reality ever has the chance to decide. Every limitation in life begins with a sentence, "I can't." It's too late. People like me don't succeed. This is just who I am. Strange how a few words can become walls taller than mountains. The world may place obstacles in your path, but the most dangerous limits are the ones you accept without a fight. The moment a limitation enters your mind and settles there comfortably, it stops being a challenge and starts becoming a rule. People love limits because limits create certainty. If failure is guaranteed, then effort becomes unnecessary. If success is impossible, then responsibility disappears. No more risk, no more disappointment, no more terrifying possibility that you could have become something greater if you had kept going. Limitations often wear the mask of realism, but many are simply fear dressed in practical clothing. Choice is the one force that keeps breaking these walls. Not motivation, not luck, not perfect timing. Choice. The quiet decision made when nobody is watching. The decision to continue when excuses are available. To learn when ignorance is easier. To stand up after embarrassment. To try again after failure has already introduced itself. Think about how many people surrender before reality ever defeats them. They lose in their minds first. The interview they never attend. The business they never start. The conversation they never have. The skill they never practice. They call it caution, but often it's imagination working against them. They rehearse failure so many times that success begins feeling unfamiliar. The funny thing about limitations is that they rarely announce themselves honestly. They don't say, "I am fear." They don't say, "I want you to stay small." They say, "Be realistic." They sound reasonable, responsible, even wise. That's why they're so effective. The most dangerous prison is the one that feels safe. Choice disrupts all of that. Choice asks uncomfortable questions. What if the limit is temporary? What if the prediction is wrong? What if the person you become tomorrow is not the person you are today? Every great change in history began with someone refusing to treat a current condition as a permanent identity. People underestimate the power of repeated choices. One choice seems insignificant. Wake up early once. Read 10 pages once. Practice for 1 hour once. Speak up once. But choices accumulate. They begin shaping habits. Habits shape character, and character shapes destiny. The future is rarely transformed by a single dramatic moment. It is transformed by ordinary decisions repeated long enough to become extraordinary. The world will always offer reasons to stay the same. Your past will try to define you. Other people's expectations will try to confine you. Fear will try to convince you that the door is locked. But choice keeps reaching for the handle, and every time it does, another limitation discovers it was never as powerful as it wanted you to believe.